The first sign wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how casually it arrived. An email. No greeting, no explanation, just a forwarded message with the subject line, "Updated guest list. Final." I was standing in my kitchen in Evanston, Illinois, barefoot on cold tile, my coffee going untouched on the counter. It was 7:12 a.m., a normal Tuesday, the kind of morning where nothing is supposed to change your life. My name is Rachel Morgan. I was 31 years old, then old enough to know better, still young enough to believe loyalty might eventually be returned. The email came from my mother, Linda Morgan. No comment, just the attachment. I opened it because I always did. The guest list scrolled past. Names I recognized immediately. My parents' friends from church, my Aunt Cheryl and her husband, cousins I hadn't seen in years, college friends of my younger sister Emily, her co-workers, her yoga instructor. I kept scrolling, my stomach tightened slow and deliberate. There was no Rachel Morgan, not under immediate family, not under extended family, not under plus ones. At the bottom, in small gray text, was a line that felt like it had been added as an afterthought. Seating adjustments maybe made at discretion of the hosts. Hosts, plural. I stared at the screen, longer than I want to admit, waiting for the feeling to turn into shock, then anger, then something dramatic. It didn't. What I felt was recognition. This wasn't sudden. This was cumulative. The wedding was in 4 weeks. Emily's wedding, my only sister, the baby of the family, the one whose birthdays were never forgotten, the one whose mistakes were always explained away, the one whose needs were always urgent. I had helped plan the engagement party. I had paid the deposit on the venue when Emily's credit card hit a limit. I had taken time off work to go dress shopping, even though I hated bridal salons and mirrors. And now quietly, efficiently, I had been removed. Not uninvited, just excluded. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my father, Harold Morgan. "Don't overthink the email. We'll talk later." Later. That word had followed me my entire life. Later, when things calm down. Later when Emily isn't so stressed. Later, when this isn't such a big moment. I didn't respond. I sat down at the table and forced myself to breathe slowly. I had learned over years of being the reasonable one that reacting too fast only made it easier for people to dismiss you. I replayed the last conversation I'd had with Emily. She had called 3 nights earlier, her voice tight, distracted. "Hey, Rach, quick thing," she said. "We're trying to keep the wedding really intimate." Intimate. There it was again. A word that sounded gentle and thoughtful, but always landed like a door quietly closing. "I know you understand," she had added quickly. "You're not really the wedding type anyway." I had laughed then, because that's what I did. I made it easier. "I understand," I had said. That was my mistake. By noon, the story started to fill in around the silence. My cousin Megan texted me a screenshot of the seating chart. "Is this real?" she asked. I stared at the image. The head table was full. Emily, her fiancé Jason, my parents, Jason's parents, even Jason's sister, who Emily openly disliked. There was an empty chair at the end. Not labeled, just empty. I could already hear how they would explain it if I asked. "It's flexible. We assumed you wouldn't mind. You're so independent." I closed the image and put my phone face down. At 2:30 p.m., my mother finally called. "Rachel," she said, like she always did when she wanted to soften something hard. "You saw the list." "Yes," I replied. A pause. Too remembered to be accidental. "Emily is under a lot of pressure," she said. "This wedding has been expensive." I waited. She felt overwhelmed. My mother continued. "And you know how sensitive she is." There it was. The justification disguised as concern. "So you removed me," I said calmly. "We didn't remove you," she corrected quickly. "We just adjusted things." "For whom?" I asked. Another pause. "For the day," she said. "It's Emily's day." That sentence settled in my chest like a weight. It's Emily's day, not my family, not our relationship, not years of shared history. Just one day, big enough to erase me. I already paid the venue deposit, I said. Yes, she replied, and we appreciate that. Appreciate, not acknowledge, not respect. Appreciate. I looked around my kitchen, the small, neat apartment I paid for myself, the calendar on the fridge marked with deadlines and reminders no one else saw. I won't be attending, I said. The silence on the other end was immediate and sharp. What do you mean, my mother asked. I mean, I won't be there, I repeated. I won't sit in an unnamed chair. Her voice tightened. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. That sentence did something to me. Not anger, clarity. I'm not making it harder, I said. I'm making it honest. She sighed the way she always did when I stepped out of line. Let's talk about this later, she said. No, I replied. We're done talking. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I pulled out a file I hadn't looked at in years. A folder labeled Morgan Trust. My grandmother, Eleanor Morgan, had left it to me when she died. She had pressed it into my hands quietly after the funeral, her fingers lingering just a moment too long. You'll need this someday, she had said. I hadn't known what she meant until now. As I opened the folder, reading names, clauses, signatures, I felt something steady rise in me. They thought this was about a wedding. They had no idea what they had just triggered, and neither did I. Yet, I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset, but because my mind had shifted into a mode I hadn't used in years. The quiet, observant one. The part of me that stopped asking why and started asking how. The Morgan Trust folder sat open on my dining table. Yellowed pages, formal language, dates that reached back further than I remembered. My grandmother Eleanor had never raised her voice. She had never taken sides publicly, but she watched everything. And unlike my parents, she believed memory was a form of protection. The trust wasn't large in the way people imagine inheritance stories. There were no headlines in it, no sprawling mansion, but it controlled something far more important: voting rights. Eleanor had been one of the original investors in Morgan & Hale Realty, the small but profitable commercial real estate company my parents and uncle ran together. She had structured her stake carefully, placing it into a trust with conditions tied to family conduct and beneficiary involvement. At the time, I had skimmed it and filed it away. I was 24, busy trying to prove myself at my first corporate job in downtown Chicago. I assumed my parents had everything handled. They did. Just not for me. One clause caught my attention, now sharp and unmistakable. In the event that a beneficiary is materially excluded from family proceedings involving shared financial contribution or reputational risk trustee, authority may be activated for review. Excluded. Materially? Those words weren't emotional. They were legal. I closed the folder slowly and leaned back in my chair. This wasn't about feelings. It never had been. My family just liked to pretend it was. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I didn't call Emily. I didn't send messages. I didn't defend myself to anyone who asked. At 10:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Emily. I let it ring. She texted instead. Why are you making Mom cry? I stared at the screen for a long moment. That was always how it went. The consequence was never the action. It was my reaction. I typed back one sentence. I'm not attending a wedding I was removed from. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Removed is dramatic, she wrote. You know I love you. Love. That word had always been expensive in my family. It came with terms, conditions, timing. I didn't reply. At lunch, my coworker James noticed something was off. You okay? He asked casually. Yes, I said. And for once, it wasn't a lie. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't questioning myself. I was simply adjusting. That afternoon, I emailed an attorney. Her name was Karen Alvarez. She specialized in trust and estate litigation, and her office was 3 blocks from mine. I had saved her name years ago, when Eleanor passed, just in case. I kept the email short. I need a consultation regarding trustee authority and exclusion clauses. Family trust. Time sensitive. She replied within the hour. Tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. If that works. It did. That night, my father showed up at my apartment. No call, no warning, just a knock that carried entitlement with it. I opened the door and stepped aside without inviting him in. "Rachel," he said, "you need to stop this. Stop what I asked." This silence, he said. This tension. I looked at him carefully. The familiar posture. The assumption that he still had authority just by standing there. "You sent me an email telling me not to overthink being excluded from my sister's wedding," I said. "What tension are you referring to?" He sighed. "You're focusing on the wrong thing." "No," I replied. "I'm finally focusing on the right one." He frowned. "This wedding isn't about you." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." His jaw tightened. "You've always been independent," he said. "We thought you'd understand." Understand. Another word that meant endure quietly. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You made a decision without me." "So did I." He shook his head. "You're being stubborn." "I'm being precise," I replied. He looked past me into the apartment, as if expecting to see evidence of something they had missed. There was nothing. "This family has sacrificed for you," he said. I met his eyes. "I've been the one sacrificing." He didn't deny it. That told me more than anything else could have. "Don't involve lawyers," he said finally. "We can fix this internally." Internally, where things disappeared, where records blurred, where Emily always came first. "I already have," I said. His expression changed. Not anger, fear. "You wouldn't," he said. I stepped back and closed the door. That night, my mother sent 3 messages. The first was concerned. The second was accusatory. The third was conciliatory. I didn't answer any of them. At 8:30 the next morning, I sat across from Karen Alvarez in a quiet office that smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She listened without interrupting as I explained the wedding, the deposit, the guest list, the trust. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "They didn't just hurt your feelings," she said. "They created legal exposure." I nodded. "I thought so." "Your grandmother was very specific," she continued. "She anticipated favoritism. This clause exists for a reason." "What happens if I activate it?" I asked. "It initiates a review," she said. "It freezes certain voting actions until the matter is resolved." "Would it affect the company?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "significantly." I thought about my parents' business meetings, their upcoming refinancing, their reliance on stability. Karen studied my face. "You don't look angry," she observed. "I'm not," I said. "I'm done being managed." She slid a document across the table. "If you sign this," she said, "you formally assert trustee authority." I picked up the pen, and for the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. Outside, the city moved on like nothing had happened. But somewhere between a wedding seating chart and a trust clause, no one thought I'd read the balance had shifted. They just didn't know it yet. The effects weren't immediate. That was the part that unsettled them most. No angry emails, no public fallout, no dramatic phone calls demanding explanations, just silence. And then quietly, the machinery they relied on began to resist. 3 days after I signed the trustee activation, Morgan and Hale Realty received a notice from their bank requesting updated governance documentation before releasing the next tranche of refinancing funds. My father called me at 6:42 a.m. I let it ring. He called again at 6:44. Then my mother. Then Emily. I didn't answer any of them. At 8:15, Karen forwarded me a copy of the notice. As expected, she wrote, "They can't proceed without resolving the trust review." I stared at the email while sipping my coffee, feeling oddly detached. like I was watching something long inevitable finally take shape. By noon, my father showed up at my office building. This time, he didn't knock. He waited in the lobby. When my assistant buzzed me, her voice was cautious. "There's a man here asking for you. Says it's urgent." "I'm in a meeting all afternoon," I said. "Please ask him to leave." She hesitated. "He says he's your father." "Yes," I replied. "And he still needs an appointment." I hung up and sat back in my chair. For years, my family's power over me had lived in access, in the assumption that they could reach me anytime, anywhere, and I would adjust. Not anymore. That evening, I received an email from my Uncle Robert Hale. He was my mother's older brother and the quieter half of the business partnership. He rarely intervened in family matters, which meant when he did, it mattered. "Rachel," the email began, "we need to talk. Not as family, as stakeholders." I agreed to meet him the next morning. We sat in a conference room at Morgan and Hale, one I had been in dozens of times, growing up, quietly doing homework, while adults talked around me like I wasn't there. Now I was the reason the meeting existed. Robert looked tired, older than I remembered. "You didn't warn us," he said. "I wasn't required to," I replied. He nodded slowly. "You've activated Eleanor's clause." "Yes." He exhaled. "Your parents are furious." "I know." "And Emily?" he added, hesitating. "She's confused." That almost made me smile. "She hasn't been confused when it benefited her," I said. Robert studied me carefully. "What do you want?" The question felt strange, coming from him. No accusation, no guilt. "I want the review to proceed," I said. "And I want acknowledgement that excluding me from a public family event tied to shared financial contribution was deliberate." He rubbed his hands together. "You know this will delay the refinancing." "Yes, and it could affect the wedding," he added. That landed differently. I leaned forward slightly. "Then perhaps it shouldn't have been treated like a private fantasy." He didn't argue. "Your grandmother warned us," he said quietly. "She said you would be the one who read the fine print." I said nothing. After the meeting, word spread fast. My mother stopped calling. Emily tried again. She showed up at my apartment this time, eyes red, voice tight. "You blindsided us," she said, the moment I opened the door. "No," I replied. "You erased me quietly. This is the echo." She scoffed. "It's just a wedding." "Then why did you need me to pay for it?" I asked. She flinched. "That's not fair," she said. "I didn't say it was," I replied. "I said it was real." She crossed her arms. "You're punishing everyone because you didn't get your way." I watched her carefully. The posture, the deflection, the practiced innocence. "I didn't want my way," I said. "I wanted a seat." "You could have said something," she snapped. "I did," I replied. "For years." She shook her head. "Mom says you've always resented me." There it was, the narrative. "I didn't resent you," I said. "I resented disappearing." She went quiet then. For a moment, I thought maybe something would land. It didn't. "You're ruining my wedding," she whispered. I met her eyes. "You did that when you decided I was optional." She left without another word. The next day, Karen called. "They're trying to negotiate informally," she said. "Your parents want to clarify intent and proceed without full review." "No," I replied. "We proceed as filed." "Understood," she said. "Be prepared. They may escalate." They did. 2 days later, I received a formal notice from my parents' attorney accusing me of acting in bad faith and threatening to contest the trust's activation. Karen wasn't surprised. "They'll argue family harmony," she said. "But the language is clear." "What about the deposit?" I asked. "That's separate," she replied. "But it strengthens your position." That night, I went for a long walk along the lake. The air was cool. The city lights flickered against the water. People passed me laughing, arguing living lives, untouched by seating charts and legal clauses. I thought about all the birthdays Emily never forgot, all the ones I did, the promotion my parents never acknowledged, the Christmas they asked me to work late so Emily could come home early, the 1,000 small choices that taught me I was adaptable because I had to be. I wasn't angry. I was finished. At midnight, I received one final message from my mother. "This has gone too far. Call me." I typed back one sentence. "The review continues." Then I turned off my phone. Somewhere, contracts were stalling. Timelines were slipping. People who had never considered my absence were now forced to account for it. And for the first time, the cost of excluding me wasn't emotional. It was structural. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 9:00 a.m. That alone told me how serious things had become. Morgan and Hale, Realty prided itself on predictability. Meetings were planned weeks in advance. Decisions moved slowly, cushioned by familiarity and habit. An emergency meeting meant someone important was uncomfortable. I arrived early, not out of nerves, but habit. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. Framed photographs lined the walls, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, my parents standing beside investors, smiling, like nothing could ever go wrong. My name wasn't in any of the photos. Robert Hale was already there seated at the far end of the table. He gave me a small nod, neutral, respectful. My parents arrived together. My father's jaw was set. My mother looked composed in the way she always did when she wanted to appear reasonable. Emily wasn't invited. That fact would matter later. Karen Alvarez joined via video, her face calm on the screen. She placed a folder in front of her camera, deliberately, a quiet reminder that this wasn't a family discussion anymore. My father spoke first. "This review has disrupted ongoing negotiations," he said. "We need to resolve this quickly." I waited. "It's not appropriate," my mother added to weaponize a trust clause over a misunderstanding. Weaponize. That word again, as if structure itself were an attack. Karen leaned forward slightly. With respect, she said the clause exists precisely to prevent misunderstandings from being buried. My father exhaled sharply. "Rachel could have come to us." "I did," I said, evenly. "Many times. This is what happened when I stopped being ignored." Silence followed. Robert cleared his throat. "The bank has frozen refinancing pending the outcome," he said. "We're exposed." I nodded. "I'm aware." My mother looked at me sharply. "So this is leverage." "No," I replied. "This is consequence." Karen spoke again. "The trust review is procedural. It will assess whether exclusion occurred in a context tied to shared financial risk. The wedding deposit is relevant." My father bristled. "That money was a gift." I shook my head slowly. "It was a contribution. One you accepted, knowing my involvement." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she didn't have a clean counter-argument. Robert leaned back in his chair. "Eleanor warned us," he said quietly. "She said favoritism would eventually cost us more than honesty." My father shot him a look. "This isn't the time." "This is exactly the time," Robert replied. The meeting dragged on. My parents argued intent. Karen cited language. Robert asked practical questions about timelines and exposure. I mostly listened. That was the part they struggled with most. They were used to me filling gaps, smoothing edges, absorbing tension. My silence forced them to confront each other. Finally, my father turned to me. "What will it take to end this?" he asked. The room stilled. I met his eyes. "The review completes. In writing, with findings acknowledged." My mother shook her head. "That could take months." "Yes," I said. "It could." "You're willing to hurt the business for this?" she asked. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "The business was hurt when you decided I was optional," I said. "This just makes it visible." Karen nodded slightly. The meeting ended without resolution. As we stood, my mother reached for my arm. "Rachel," she said quietly, "we raised you better than this." I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. "You raised me to be compliant," I said, "not invisible." I gently stepped away. That afternoon, the fallout spread. The bank requested updated projections. Vendors delayed commitments. A development partner postponed a signing. Nothing catastrophic, just enough friction to remind everyone that stability depended on trust, not silence. Emily found out that evening. She called me from my parents' house, her voice shaking with anger. "You're humiliating them," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm letting them be seen." She scoffed. "This is about control." Yes, I agreed. Mine. There was a long pause. "You could still come to the wedding," she said finally. "We can fix the seating." I almost laughed. "You don't fix erasure with a chair," I said. "You fix it with respect." She hung up. The next week, Karen called with an update. "We've requested deposit records and communication logs," she said. "Your parents' attorney is pushing back." "Let them," I replied. "They're also asking for mediation," she added. "No," I said. "Review first. Mediation later." She smiled faintly. "You're very clear." "I've had practice," I said. On Wednesday, my father sent me an email. Not a demand, not a threat, a question. "Did you ever feel like we loved Emily more?" I read it twice. Then I closed the email without responding, because the answer didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that he was asking it now. That night, I pulled the Morgan Trust folder out again and reread Eleanor's handwriting. Her language was precise, unemotional. She hadn't written to punish anyone. She had written to protect the person who would eventually stop explaining herself. As the review moved forward, one thing became clear. My family had always assumed I would choose peace over power. They had never considered that I might redefine peace entirely. And with every delayed signature, every frozen account, every careful legal step, the ground beneath them shifted just enough to make that mistake impossible to ignore. The wedding was 2 weeks away. The review was just getting started, and for the first time, I wasn't counting down to an event. I was counting forward to an outcome. The wedding countdown didn't slow. It sped up. Invitations were already mailed. Vendors were locked in. Guests were flying in from out of state. Emily posted photos daily. Dress fittings, flower samples, smiling captions that said everything was perfect. Nothing in those photos showed the strain underneath. That was always our family's strength. Appearances first, consequences later. The trust review moved forward quietly, methodically. Karen requested financial records tied to the venue deposit, email chains, calendar invites. Anything that showed my involvement wasn't symbolic but material. What surprised me wasn't what we found. It was how little they tried to hide it. My parents had treated my support like background noise. For so long, they forgot it counted. One email from my mother stood out. Sent to the venue coordinator 3 months earlier. "Rachel will handle the payment. She's flexible." Flexible. That word again. Always that word. Karen flagged it immediately. "This establishes reliance," she said. "They accepted your contribution as functional, not optional." Meaning I asked, meaning exclusion after reliance, is actionable, she replied. The language was clinical, clean, nothing emotional about it. That night, my father called again, later than usual. I answered this time. "Rachel," he said, voice low, "your mother isn't sleeping." "I'm not responsible for her sleep," I replied calmly. "She feels attacked," he continued. "I was removed from my sister's wedding," I said. "That wasn't an attack," he sighed. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "No," I said. I stopped making it smaller. He didn't respond. The next escalation came from Emily. She sent me a long message just after midnight. "I don't understand why you're doing this. I never asked you to pay for anything. Mom said you offered. You always do this. You make yourself the victim and then punish everyone when they don't play along." I read it slowly once then again. There it was, the story they had always told themselves, that my giving was performative, that my silence was consent, that my presence was optional until it wasn't convenient. I typed one sentence. "You accepted what you knew I gave." She didn't reply. The review meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. All trustees, all partners, attorneys present. It would be the first time everything was laid out in one room. In the days leading up to it, my mother tried a different approach. She showed up at my apartment again, this time alone. She brought a pie. Apple. My favorite. She knew that. "I'm not here to argue," she said quickly. "I just want to talk." I let her in. We sat at the table where the trust folder had lived for weeks. She glanced at it, then away. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "I believe you," I replied. She looked relieved. "But intent doesn't undo impact," I continued. Her shoulders slumped slightly. "You were always so capable," she said softly. "We thought you didn't need as much." "I needed honesty," I said. "Not protection." She wiped her eyes. "Emily needed more." "That doesn't mean I needed less," I replied. She nodded slowly, like the idea was unfamiliar, but finally landing. "Can you stop this?" she asked quietly. I considered her face, the years of choices, the patterns she didn't see until they cost her something. "No," I said, "but I can let it be fair." She didn't argue. When she left, she took the pie with her. The review meeting was tense, but controlled. Karen spoke first, outlining the scope: financial reliance, exclusion, reputational impact. My parents' attorney countered with intent: stress, family dynamics. Robert Hale listened carefully, saying little. Then Karen introduced the timeline: dates, payments, communications. When she finished, the room was silent. Robert broke it. "This isn't about the wedding," he said. "It's about governance." My father stiffened. "We're talking about family." "No," Robert replied. "We're talking about patterns." He turned to me. "You were treated as a resource, not a stakeholder," he said. "That's not sustainable." My mother looked at the table. Emily wasn't there, but her absence was loud. The trustees asked questions, practical ones, about precedent, about risk. Karen answered calmly. At the end, the lead trustee spoke. "The review will continue," he said. "In the meantime, certain voting actions will remain suspended." My father's face drained of color. This wasn't symbolic anymore. Afterward, in the hallway, my father stopped me. "You've made your point," he said. "What else do you want?" I met his eyes. "I want you to stop asking me to disappear," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "I didn't know you felt erased," he said. I didn't raise my voice. "I told you," I replied. "You didn't hear me." The wedding was 5 days away. Guests were arriving. Emily's friends filled social media with excitement. My parents smiled in photos like nothing was wrong. But behind the scenes, the company stalled. A development partner postponed a signing. The bank held firm. The trust review sat between them and forward motion. The cost of keeping me quiet had finally exceeded the cost of listening. On Thursday night, I received an email from Karen. "They want to settle," she wrote. "After the wedding." I stared at the words. "After the wedding," I typed back. "No, before." The next morning, my father called at dawn. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm choosing timing," I said. "You're putting us in an impossible position," he replied. I paused. "No," I said. "You did that when you assumed I'd wait." The line went quiet. The wedding was in 48 hours. And for the first time, the pressure wasn't on me to give in. It was on them to decide what mattered more: a ceremony, or the structure holding everything underneath it together. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Friday at 3:00 p.m. The rehearsal dinner was at 6:30. That timing wasn't accidental. My parents had agreed to meet because they believed pressure would work in their favor. They assumed I would soften as the clock ticked closer to the ceremony, that I wouldn't risk being blamed for disrupting Emily's wedding weekend. They still thought this was about guilt. I arrived at Karen's office 10 minutes early. My parents were already there. So was Robert. Their attorney sat stiffly at the end of the table, files neatly stacked like armor. No one smiled. Karen nodded at me, calm as always. "Let's begin." My father spoke first. His voice was controlled, measured, like he was negotiating a contract, not addressing his daughter. "We're prepared to acknowledge miscommunication," he said, "and reimburse Rachel for the venue deposit in full." Miscommunication. Reimburse. I waited. In exchange, he continued, "We ask that the trust review be withdrawn immediately so the refinancing can proceed." Karen glanced at me. I didn't react. That doesn't address the exclusion, Karen said evenly, or the governance implications. My mother leaned forward. We've said we're sorry. No, I replied quietly. You've said you're uncomfortable. The room stilled. Robert cleared his throat. Rachel, he said, what would resolution look like to you? I took a breath. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted to be precise. I want formal acknowledgement that my financial contribution created reliance, I said. I want that reliance recognized in writing. And I want my position as trustee affirmed without contest. My father's jaw tightened. That gives you leverage over the company. No, I replied. It gives the company protection from favoritism. Their attorney shook his head. That's excessive. Karen looked at him. It's compliant. Silence stretched. My mother spoke next, her voice softer now. If we do this, she said, what happens next? The review completes, I said. Then the trust steps back. Nothing more. You're asking us to admit wrongdoing, my father said. Yes, I replied. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. You've always needed things spelled out. I looked at him. I learned that from you, I said. At 4:12 p.m., they asked for a break. Karen and I stepped into her office. She closed the door. They're cornered, she said. But they may still try to wait you out. I know, I replied. You're steady, she observed. I'm finished, I said. There's a difference. When we returned, my parents had shifted. Not much, but enough. My father slid a document across the table. We'll acknowledge the reliance, he said, and affirm trustee authority. But we want language limiting future intervention. Karen scanned the page. This still gives them room to contest, she said. I shook my head slightly. No revisions. The language stands. My mother looked at me, something like disbelief flickering across her face. You're not leaving us any space, she said. I spent years giving you all of it, I replied. I'm done. The room went quiet again. At 5:01 p.m., my father picked up the pen. He hesitated, then signed. My mother followed. No tears, no speeches, just ink. Karen collected the papers, nodded once. I'll file immediately. The settlement was executed at 5:17 p.m. I left the building without lingering. Outside, the city moved like it always did. Cars, people. Nothing marking the moment that had just ended a pattern, decades in the making. At 6:08 p.m., my phone buzzed. Emily, I almost ignored it. Almost. Did you really do this today? She asked, her voice sharp, panicked. Yes, I replied. On purpose, she pressed. Yes. You couldn't wait, she demanded. No, I said. Her breathing was uneven. You're unbelievable. I paused. You removed me from your wedding, I said. You just didn't expect consequences. She went quiet. They're all talking about it, she whispered. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. I looked out the window at the street below. I'm not responsible for their emotions, I said. You've ruined everything, she said. No, I replied. I stopped letting you. She hung up. That night, I didn't attend the rehearsal dinner. I went home, cooked myself a simple meal, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for no reason. Around 9:30, my cousin Megan texted. There's an empty seat at the table, she wrote. No name card. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I replied, keep it empty. The wedding would happen the next day. Dresses pressed, flowers arranged, guests smiling for photos. But beneath it all, something irreversible had shifted. For the first time, my family understood that access to me was not automatic, that my silence was not consent, and that timing, when chosen deliberately, is a form of power. Tomorrow they would celebrate a union built on appearance. Tonight, I had signed away the role they had assigned me, and nothing they did next could undo that. I woke up on the morning of the wedding to silence. No alarms, no calls, no obligations pulling me out of bed. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of my apartment, soft and indifferent. Somewhere across town, hair was being styled dresses, zipped, nerves buzzing. My absence was already built into the day, whether they admitted it or not. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the street come alive. Couples walked dogs. A delivery truck double-parked. Life continued without ceremony. At 9:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not Emily, not my parents. Robert. "They're unraveling," he said without preamble. "I assumed they would," I replied. "The venue coordinator was notified late last night," he continued. "There are questions about payment authorization." I closed my eyes briefly. "I transferred nothing." "I know," he said. "But your name is on the original agreement." Of course it was. That was the thing about being useful. Your name stayed even after you were erased. "What do they want?" I asked. "They want you to confirm coverage," he said. Quietly, I looked at the coffee mug in my hand. The steam rising. The calm. "No," I said. Robert exhaled. I figured. At 10:30, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was tight controlled, as if she were speaking in a public place. "Rachel, please. There's confusion with the venue. We just need clarification. This isn't the time for boundaries." Boundaries. I almost smiled. At 11:07, Emily texted, "Can you please just answer the phone?" I didn't. At noon, a message came from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Mark, wedding coordinator. We need to resolve an authorization issue." I stared at the screen. They had given my contact information to a stranger on the most important day of their lives, assuming I would step in because I always had. I typed one sentence. "I'm not involved in this event." Then I blocked the number. At 12:45, Megan sent me a photo. The ceremony space was beautiful. White chairs, soft florals, sunlight streaming through tall windows. In the front row beside my parents was an empty seat. Not hidden, not filled, just empty. "They didn't replace it," she wrote. I set my phone down. At 1:30, the ceremony began. I knew because the messages stopped. No more calls, no more texts. Everyone was busy, pretending nothing was wrong. I went for a walk. The lake was calm, the air warm. Families picnicked on the grass. Children ran past me laughing. I thought about how many moments I had altered myself to fit into. How many times I had adjusted expectations to avoid discomfort, and how none of that had earned me a place when it mattered. At 3:18, my phone buzzed again. "Emily," I answered. What I asked. Her voice was hoarse. "Jason left." I stopped walking. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He walked out," she said. "Right after the vows." I closed my eyes. "What happened?" I asked. There was chaos in the background. Voices. Someone crying. "He said he couldn't do this," she said. That he didn't know who he was marrying anymore. I leaned against a railing, the water stretching out in front of me. "Did he say why?" I asked. She swallowed. "He said if I could erase my own sister this easily, he didn't trust what I'd erase later." I said nothing. "He said I learned it from Mom," she added, almost whispering. The line went quiet. At 3:41, Megan sent another photo. Guests standing, confused. Emily in her dress, frozen at the altar. My father staring straight ahead. My mother clutching her purse like it might hold her upright. The caption read, "People are leaving." I felt no satisfaction. What I felt was distance. This wasn't my revenge. It wasn't something I had orchestrated. It was a consequence unfolding without my participation. At 4:10, Robert called again. "The reception is suspended," he said carefully. "Vendors are asking who's paying." "I'm not," I replied. "I know," he said. By evening, the story had started spreading. Not online yet, not publicly, but inside the family, inside the business, inside the circles that thrived on whispers. Emily locked herself in a bathroom. My parents argued in the parking lot. Jason left town, and I wasn't there. That was the part no one could process. I hadn't shown up to defend. I hadn't shown up to explain. I hadn't shown up to absorb blame. I had simply stopped participating. At 7:22 p.m., my mother called again. This time I answered. Rachel, she said, her voice breaking. This is a disaster. I know, I replied. You could have prevented this, she said. I thought about that. No, I said. You could have. Silence. We need you, she whispered. I closed my eyes. You needed me when you erased me, I said. Now you're just reacting. She started to cry. I didn't hang up. I didn't comfort her. I let the sound exist without stepping into it. I can't fix this, I said finally. And I won't try. The call ended shortly after. That night, I sat alone, in my apartment light's low window open. Somewhere across town, a wedding dress lay folded without purpose. A venue stood half-used. Guests returned to hotels with stories they would tell for years. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table. The chair across from me was empty. For the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. Tomorrow the aftermath would begin. Explanations, rewriting, blame. But tonight, I understood something with absolute clarity. I didn't need to be present for the truth to surface. All I had needed to do was leave. By morning, the silence had texture. It wasn't calm. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that follows something breaking in public when everyone is pretending not to look at the shards. I woke to 27 notifications. I didn't open them. I showered, dressed, ate a piece of toast, standing at the counter. Routine steadied me. The world hadn't ended. It rarely does when people expect you to clean up after it. At 9:06 a.m., Karen emailed. They're asking whether the settlement can be amended, she wrote. Specifically, they want to reopen trustee scope. I stared at the screen, then typed back a single word. No. At 9:11, Robert called. They're scrambling, he said. Your parents want to know if you'll issue a statement. Something neutral. Something to calm investors. I leaned against the window and watched a cyclist glide past. I won't, I said. He sighed. They're worried the story will leak. It will, I replied. That's not my concern. What has he asked? That the truth doesn't get edited again, I said. He didn't argue. By noon, the story had found air. Not in headlines, not yet, but in the places that matter more. Text chains, boardroom whispers, quiet calls between people who suddenly realized the structure they trusted was fragile. Emily hadn't issued anything. Neither had Jason. That absence became its own narrative. Speculation filled the gap. At 1:24 p.m., my mother sent a long email. I didn't read it right away. I let it sit while I made myself lunch, while I rinsed a plate, while I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and felt the weight of the last 24 hours settle into something solid. Then I opened it. She wrote about stress, about miscommunication, about how no one intended for things to unfold this way, about how families sometimes hurt each other without meaning to. Near the end, she wrote one sentence that stopped me. You were always strong. We assumed you'd be fine. I closed the email. That assumption had been the foundation of everything. At 2:10, my phone rang again. Emily. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice was flat drained. They're saying it's my fault, she said. That I pushed too hard. That I learned it from Mom. Jason's parents want answers. People are calling me selfish. She laughed once sharply. I didn't think it would turn on me. I sat on the edge of the bed listening. I just wanted one day, she continued. One day where things weren't complicated. The message ended there. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just shock that control had consequences. I didn't call back. That afternoon, the bank requested an updated call with stakeholders. Robert attended. My parents did too. I wasn't invited. I wasn't required. At 4:03 p.m., Karen forwarded me the summary. The lenders want assurance that governance risk is contained, she wrote. They're asking about succession and conflict mitigation. I smiled faintly. That was the irony. The very thing my parents had avoided by sidelining me was now the reason they were exposed. At 5:30, Megan stopped by my apartment. She didn't knock loudly, just a soft tap, like she wasn't sure she should be there. "I brought wine," she said. We sat at the table, and she poured without asking. "They don't know what to do," she said. "They're all talking at once. No one's listening." "That sounds familiar," I replied. She studied me carefully. "You're not gloating." "No," I said. "Are you relieved?" she asked. I thought about it. "I'm aligned," I said. For the first time. She nodded like that made sense. "They're saying you planned this," she added. "That you wanted to punish Emily." I met her eyes. "Did it feel planned to you?" She shook her head. It felt overdue. That night, the first article appeared. Not about the wedding. About Morgan and Hale Realty. A brief piece. Neutral tone. It mentioned governance review. Leadership tension. No names attached to causes. But people read between lines. My father called after it went live. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "No," I replied. "It's being seen." "We built this company," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "And you forgot who helped hold it up." Silence followed. "You could still help us stabilize this," he said finally. I waited. Publicly, he added. Quietly. There it was again. Quietly. "I already helped," I said, by refusing to lie. He didn't respond. I hung up. Later that evening, I took out the Morgan Trust folder again. I didn't reread it. I just held it for a moment, thinking about Eleanor, about how she had watched the same patterns play out decades earlier, in chosen structure over confrontation. She hadn't shouted. She had planned. I opened my laptop and drafted a short memo, not to my family, to the trustees. It outlined my expectations, clear timelines, clear boundaries, no informal negotiations, no back channels. When I finished, I sent it. At 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. "You won." I stared at it, then deleted it. This wasn't winning. Winning implies competition. This was something else. This was stepping out of a system that only functioned when I absorbed its failures. Outside, the city hummed. Life went on. People fell asleep, woke up, carried their own quiet battles. Tomorrow my family would begin rewriting the story, explaining, softening, shifting blame. I wouldn't participate, because the aftermath doesn't belong to the person who finally stopped holding everything together. It belongs to the ones who relied on that silence to survive. The first formal inquiry came on Monday morning. Not from family, not from gossip, from an outside firm. Karen called me at 8:02 a.m., her voice steady but alert. "The trustees have commissioned an independent governance audit," she said. "It's standard after a disruption like this." "Who requested it?" I asked. "Two of the lenders," she replied, "and one minority investor we didn't expect." I sat down slowly. "Who?" I asked. She smiled even through the phone. "Eleanor's old partner, Samuel Brooks." That name landed hard. Samuel Brooks had been my grandmother's closest business ally decades ago. Quiet, methodical, he had stepped away long before I entered the picture, but his shadow lingered in footnotes and meeting minutes. "He still holds a small stake," Karen continued, "enough to ask uncomfortable questions." I closed my eyes. Eleanor hadn't just left a trust. She had left witnesses. By mid-morning, emails flooded Morgan and Hale's leadership inboxes. Requests for documentation, requests for explanations, requests that could no longer be brushed aside with family language. Robert called me around noon. "They're asking about historical decision-making," he said. "Specifically, whether personal relationships influenced governance." I could almost hear my father's frustration in the background. "Are they asking about me?" I asked. "Yes," he admitted, "but not the way your parents think." I leaned back in my chair. "How so?" "They're asking why someone with documented financial contribution and fiduciary awareness was excluded from formal processes," he said. I let that settle. For years, the question had always been why I was too much. Now, it was why I had been pushed out. Emily resurfaced that afternoon. Not directly. She sent a message through Megan. "She wants to talk," Megan said gently. she says. She didn't know it would go this far. I stared at the message for a long time. This didn't go far, I typed back. It went honest. Megan didn't push. At 3:45, Karen forwarded me a preliminary memo from the auditors. It wasn't accusatory. It was worse. It was neutral. Patterns of informal authority. Repeated reliance without role definition. Risk exposure through familial favoritism. Language like that doesn't yell. It stains. At 4:30, my father called again. This time I answered. "We're being asked things we can't explain away," he said. "I know," I replied. "They're questioning decisions. From years ago," he continued. "Deals we assumed were settled." "They were settled," I said. "Just not examined." His voice wavered. "You could help us frame this." I thought about all the times I had framed things for them. Softened edges. Translated harm into misunderstanding. "No," I said. "I won't frame anything. You're enjoying this," he accused weakly. I paused. "No," I said honestly. "I'm done protecting you from yourselves." Silence followed. Then quietly, "I don't recognize you anymore." I looked out the window at the late afternoon light. "You never really did," I said. That evening, I attended a small dinner with colleagues. Nothing fancy. Just conversation that didn't orbit around damage control. Someone asked how my family was. "They're adjusting," I said. It was the truth. Later that night, an article went live. Still careful, still vague, but this time it mentioned the audit. Investors. Investors read that kind of thing closely. At 11:17 p.m., Emily finally texted me directly. "I need to understand why you didn't stop this." I read the words slowly. "You think I could have stopped this?" I typed back. "That's the problem." She replied almost immediately. "I thought family protected each other." I stared at the screen. "Family protects by telling the truth," I wrote. "Not by hiding it." There was a long pause. Then, "I didn't think you'd choose yourself over me." I set the phone down without responding. Because that sentence said everything. The audit accelerated. Interviews were scheduled. Records examined. Old assumptions dragged into daylight. My parents were polite, cooperative, strained. Robert stayed neutral, and I stayed out of it. That was the most unsettling part for them. I wasn't fighting. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't trying to control the narrative. I had already stepped out. On Thursday afternoon, Karen sent me a final update for the week. "They're recommending structural changes," she said. "Formalizing roles, removing informal veto power." "Whose?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "Your father's," she said. I exhaled slowly. Not triumph, resolution. That night, I sat at my table with a notebook and wrote one sentence. "Silence protects the system that benefits from it." I closed the notebook and turned off the light. Somewhere across town, my parents were answering questions they had avoided for decades. Emily was sitting with the wreckage of a moment she thought would crown her, and I was no longer the buffer between them and consequence. The questions had teeth now, and they weren't asking me to answer. The recommendation became a directive faster than anyone expected. By Tuesday morning, the auditors had issued a formal interim report. It wasn't public, but it didn't need to be. The people who mattered had already read it. Morgan & Hale Realty was instructed to restructure its executive authority immediately. Not suggested, not advised, required. Karen called me before the board meeting began. "They're suspending unilateral decision rights," she said. "Effective today." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. "And my father?" I asked. "He'll retain an operational role," she replied, "but no veto power, no informal overrides. Everything goes through the board." That was it. No dramatic removal. No courtroom spectacle. Just the quiet removal of a lever he had always assumed was permanent. Power doesn't always fall. Sometimes it simply stops working. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. I wasn't there. I wasn't invited. I wasn't mentioned in the official agenda. But my absence hovered over every conversation. Robert called afterward. "They're stunned," he said. "Your father especially." I imagined it easily. The way Harold Morgan filled rooms with certainty. The way he spoke decided last, overruled quietly. What did he say? I asked. Very little, Robert replied. That's what scared everyone. When people who rely on authority lose it, they don't explode. They go silent. Emily showed up at my apartment that evening. I didn't expect her. I almost didn't answer the door. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally, like the air had been let out of her. I don't know who I am anymore, she said, as soon as I let her in. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't ask questions. I waited. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly together. They're blaming each other, she said. Mom says Dad was too controlling. Dad says Mom enabled everything. Jason won't return my calls. She laughed once hollow. And now the company is changing because of something I thought didn't matter. I leaned against the counter. It mattered because it wasn't just about you, I said. She looked up. Then what was it about? I considered her carefully. Control, I said. And who paid for it? She swallowed. I didn't know. I shook my head. You didn't ask. Silence stretched between us. Do you hate me? She asked finally. No, I replied. I don't trust you. She flinched, but she didn't argue. That's worse, she whispered. No, I said. It's honest. She stayed another 10 minutes. We talked about nothing important. Then she left. That was the most real conversation we'd had in years. The following week, the changes became visible. Emails copied to committees instead of individuals. Decisions documented. Approvals delayed until consensus was reached. People adjusted quickly. That was the thing no one liked to admit. The system didn't need a dominant voice to function. It had only needed one because it was convenient. Karen sent me the final version of the audit summary. It included a recommendation I hadn't expected. Appointment of an independent trustee representative. My name was listed as a candidate. I read it twice. I didn't want the role. I didn't need it. But I understood what it meant. They weren't asking me to fix things. They were acknowledging that excluding me had weakened the structure. I declined the position. Instead, I submitted a written statement outlining boundaries. No operational involvement. No informal consultation. No family mediation. Just distance. Robert supported it. The board accepted it. My father didn't call. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to negotiate. One afternoon, Karen asked me a question I hadn't considered. Do you feel vindicated? She asked. I thought about it. No, I said. I feel unburdened. She smiled slightly. That's usually the end goal. That weekend, I took a train north. Just me. No itinerary. No obligation to check in. I watched the city fade into trees, then into open land. I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Relief without anticipation. No waiting for the next call. No preparing for the next request. Just time moving forward without asking for permission. When I returned, I found an envelope taped to my door. No return address. Inside was a short note in my mother's handwriting. We're learning. I don't know how long it will take, but I see it now. No apology. No demand. Just acknowledgement. I folded the note and put it in a drawer. Not as forgiveness, as record. Because the truth doesn't need to be loud to be permanent. And the most powerful moment in any reversal isn't when the tables turn. It's when the people who once controlled the room realize their voice no longer decides what happens next. The quiet that followed wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the absence of noise I had mistaken for responsibility. Weeks passed without crisis. No one needed me to translate smooth over or quietly absorb blame. The company adjusted to its new structure faster than anyone expected. Meetings ended on time. Decisions were documented. People stopped asking, "What does Harold think?" and started asking, "What does the data say?" That shift alone told me everything. I hadn't been essential because I was uniquely capable. I had been essential because the system depended on someone staying silent. Without that silence, it recalibrated. I noticed the change most in my own body. My shoulders stopped tensing when my phone buzzed. I slept through the night without replaying conversations. I stopped pre-writing explanations in my head for questions no one had asked yet. One afternoon, Karen and I met for coffee. No files, no agendas. "You know," she said, stirring her cup, "most people in your position ask how to regain influence." I smiled faintly. I asked how to exit cleanly. She nodded. "That's rarer than you think." It was true. For the first time since my early 20s, I wasn't positioning myself for anything. I wasn't bracing for backlash or hoping for reconciliation. I was simply choosing what came next, without consulting a room full of expectations. Emily tried again a few weeks later. She didn't call. She sent an email. Carefully written, polite, like she was afraid of using the wrong tone. "I'm starting therapy," she wrote. "They keep asking about control and validation. I don't know what to say yet. I just wanted you to know I'm trying." I read it once, then I closed it. Trying wasn't the same as changing, and changing wasn't something I needed to supervise. My parents adjusted in quieter ways. My father stopped attending every meeting. My mother stopped speaking for him. Their marriage shifted subtle but unmistakable now that there was no system rewarding their old dynamic. We spoke occasionally. Short conversations, neutral topics, weather, books, a neighbor's renovation. No one asked me to come home. No one asked me to fix anything. That absence felt strange at first. Then it felt like space. I took a week off work and went north, renting a small cabin near Lake Michigan. No itinerary, no reception, just water and time. One morning, sitting on the dock with my feet in the cold lake, I realized something that startled me. I had never actually chosen my life. I had responded to it, managed it, maintained it, but choice had always been secondary to expectation. I thought about the younger version of myself, the one who learned early that being agreeable made things easier, that being capable made you useful, that being quiet kept the peace. I didn't resent her. She survived with the tools she had. But I didn't need those tools anymore. When I returned, I made small changes. I declined projects that required constant availability. I stopped answering emails after hours. I invested time in friendships that didn't ask me to explain my family. No one protested. That was the most telling part. The world didn't collapse when I stopped being endlessly accommodating. At work, a promotion opportunity came up. Bigger scope, more visibility, more pressure. I said no, not because I couldn't do it, because I didn't want the life attached to it. The decision felt radical and completely calm. One evening, Megan came over for dinner. We cooked pasta, drank wine, talked about nothing important. "I don't think they expected you to be okay," she said. "I know," I replied. "They thought you'd want an apology, or revenge, or something loud." I smiled. "I wanted peace." She nodded. "You got it." Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened the drawer where I'd kept my grandmother's trust documents. I didn't reread them. I didn't need to. I thought about Eleanor, about how she had lived in a family that rewarded control and punished honesty, and still found a way to leave something clean behind. Not money, structure. I understood her now. True protection doesn't come from fighting every battle. It comes from designing exits. Months later, the company finalized its new governance charter. My name appeared once in the historical acknowledgments. No title, no role, just record. That felt right. Emily sent one last message before the year ended. "I understand now why you left." I didn't reply. Understanding didn't require response. By then, my life had taken on a rhythm that felt steady and earned. Mornings without urgency, evenings without explanation. Relationships built on consent, not obligation. I had learned something I wished I'd known sooner. Being excluded hurts, but being erased teaches you exactly where you never belonged. And when you stop trying to earn space in rooms built on control, you discover something unexpected. You're lighter, Because the life that comes after silence isn't empty. It's yours. The story my family told about me had finally ended. Not with a confrontation, but with my absence no longer costing me anything. And that was the moment I knew I had already won. The moment that confirmed everything didn't come with drama. It came quietly on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, nearly a year after the wedding that never finished. I was sitting at my desk when an email notification slid across my screen. Morgan and Hale Realty, annual shareholder update. The kind of message I used to read, carefully anticipating whether I would be mentioned, consulted, needed. This time, I almost deleted it. Almost. I opened it out of curiosity, not attachment. The report was clean. Boring even. New governance language. Clear separation of roles. Independent oversight. Strong quarter. Reduced risk exposure. My father's name appeared once. Under founding leadership. Past tense. My mother's name didn't appear at all. And mine was listed in a single line near the end. Trust restructuring, initiated by beneficiary Rachel Morgan in 2024, resulted in improved transparency and long-term stability. No praise, no apology, no emotion. Just record. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair. That was it. No follow-up calls, no family backlash, no final argument waiting around the corner. The story had ended without asking for my permission. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. Emily sent a message that evening, shorter than the others. I moved out. I'm working now. I'm trying to do things without help. I read it carefully. Then I typed back one sentence. I hope you build something that doesn't require someone else shrinking. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to. My parents and I settled into a relationship that could best be described as distant but civil. Occasional texts, holiday cards, neutral updates, no requests, no guilt, no emotional bookkeeping. They had learned something too, not because I taught them, because silence finally stopped rewarding their behavior. One Sunday afternoon, I visited my grandmother's grave alone. No family gathering, no ceremony, just me in a quiet patch of grass under a pale sky. I stood there longer than I planned to. I get it now, I said softly. You weren't trying to protect the family. You were protecting the one who would be blamed for fixing it. The wind moved through the trees. No response. That was enough. The following spring I moved. Not far. Just enough to feel intentional. A smaller place. More light. Less noise. A neighborhood where no one knew my last name or expected me to perform competence on demand. I built a life that asked fewer questions of me. I worked. I rested. I said no without explanation, and nothing bad happened. That was the lie I had lived under for years. That withdrawal meant collapse. That stepping back meant everything would fall apart. It didn't. The people who relied on my silence were forced to adapt. The systems that depended on my compliance were forced to change. And the version of me who believed love required endurance finally disappeared. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, I want to say this clearly. You are not difficult for noticing patterns. You are not dramatic for wanting acknowledgement. You are not disloyal for refusing to disappear. Family drama doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like being quietly excluded while still being expected to contribute. Workplace betrayal doesn't always come with firing. Sometimes it comes with demotion by omission. And revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like letting the system face itself without you buffering the damage. The most powerful moment in my story wasn't the audit. It wasn't the wedding collapse. It wasn't watching authority lose its grip. It was the moment I realized I didn't want their approval anymore. Because approval is a currency used by people who benefit from your doubt. And the day you stop spending it, the power shifts. If you've ever been excluded, erased, or told to wait your turn while paying the cost of someone else's comfort, remember this. You don't owe silence to people who mistake it for loyalty. You don't owe access to people who only value you when you're useful. And you don't need to sit in chairs that were never meant to hold you. You can walk away whole. And if this story resonated with you, take a moment to comment, or share where you're listening from. Subscribe if you want more real stories about family drama, betrayal, revenge, inheritance, and the quiet kind of karma that doesn't shout but lasts. Because choosing yourself isn't the end of the story. It's the first chapter that finally belongs to you.